What are the futures of your wildest dreams?
So much of what's happening at the moment feels so heavy and weighty and dense and wants to sort of pull us down. It's important that we ask this question, but not go into spiritual bypass, not to go into sort of, oh, yeah, it's all fine, it's all fluffy, let's just focus on the light. Like to hold that question while we hold like the real truth of where we are. So my vision basically is to co-create a world where we can remember that the evolution of our consciousness is reliant on the thriving of the natural world, and that the thriving of the natural world is completely reliant on the evolution of our consciousness. And this is the circle that I see, the circle of reciprocity. It's like we're completely intertwined, and one leads into the other. It's like the infinity symbol, they're just flowing one within the other.
Beautiful. And so, in amongst all of the denseness that we're experiencing, how do we hold and be guided by such a vision?
Well, there are a few themes here, but the fundamental first one is coming back to our true nature. And it's interesting, that phrase, true nature, because it embedded in it is the word nature. So there's the clue. It's like we need to come and embed ourselves back into the context that we are nature. That, because we've separated ourselves off, we've gone into a sort of hierarchical system where we think that the earth belongs to us rather than we belong to the earth. And that for me is the first step. And all of that for me sits into the theme of belonging. It's like we've lost our sense of belonging. It's belonging to the earth, belonging to the mystery, belonging to community, belonging to a sense of being welcomed somehow. Like so many of us feel unwelcome fundamentally in our life. And it was even from the day we were born. Francis Weller talks about the village and how different our lives would be if when we were born into this village where 25 generations of our ancestors behind were born onto exactly the same piece of land, and that land has been understood and connected with and tended to. And when we're born, there's the whole village there with 40 pairs of hands and eyes going, we're so glad you're here, you belong. And that there's that sense of belonging from day one. Even if we don't, we misbehave, if you like, or even if we aren't like wonderful, perfect human beings, that there's this sense of belonging. And that
Oh,
sense of
yeah.
belonging feels like the missing piece. We live in such isolation. And because of this soul wound that we all carry, which because we weren't welcomed like that, we have this fundamental belief that there's something wrong with us, that we're not welcome, that we don't belong, that there's something wrong with us, that we're not loved, etc. And that village that we were embedded into, even if we go away from the village, so we go off traveling around the world, we go off on our ventures, in our psyche, we know the village exists and we know that we can go back. And just the knowing of that changes how we move in the world. It completely changes how we move in the world, because there's a place in our soul we go, that land, I belong to that land, I belong to those people, I belong to everything that is there in the more than human world. And there's this deep time lineage is a context that's holding me. There's future ancestors there, there's elders there, there's the entire diversity of life represented there. And I, in my uniqueness, have a place in that circle. And I don't have to question whether I belong there. I can come and take my place in that circle. And I'm not going to sit there going, oh, I wonder if it's okay to be here. And something about, even if I do something that goes against how the best version of myself, I commit a crime, I do something horrible to someone, I'm violent, I do something. There's this beautiful tradition in the Dagara tradition, and when something like that happens in their village, like somebody does something, that the way they see that is the reason that person has done something like that is because they've lost their sense of belonging, that they've forgotten that they're connected. So their response to that isn't to punish them. They bring them into the middle of the village and then love them to within an inch of their life and remind them of all of their brilliance, of all of their magnificence, of all of the qualities that they are. And that brings them back into their connectedness. And then from there, it's like you're less like, you're just going to feel your own heart and be like, oh my God, I didn't want to do that. I mean, how different our world would be if that's how we arrived, if that was the context of our life. That sense of belonging is like the pivotal piece that changes everything.
And it's beautiful. And as you speak about it, I'm sure everyone listening can feel like how special that might be. But it's very different from the world that we live in.
It is.
And we live in a world that has deep histories of colonization, that has deep histories of war, that has, and deep presences of these things as well. And we have, so many countries that are being obliterated in one way or another, and people that are searching for a place to call home. And even, even within cultures where people might be born in the country that their ancestors are from, perhaps they don't live in the same areas. We do this thing where we move to cities, or we move to areas where we feel like there might be like-minded community, whatever that means. And so do you really feel that level of belonging and welcome can be taught or can be healed through workshops and processes?
Oh, I so love what you're saying, because, what I've just spoken to is like such a deep longing. But then there's the reality, like you say, with everything that you've just, brought to the frame. It's like, okay, what does this actually look like on planet Earth today, given everything, given all of that? And you're right, it's not accessible to everybody. But there's something about, often we don't let ourselves vision and dream for what we really want because we can't see how to make it happen. We go, well, what's the point in longing for that? What's the point in dreaming for that? What's the point in even talking about it? Because it's just never going to happen. And for me, there's something about honouring the longing and honouring the dream and speaking of it and holding it in my system, because I'm now in a conversation with something that's bigger than me, that's something that is of the source truth. And even if it never happens, it's not the point. It's not throwing away that deep, deep longing that kind of calls us back in. And so we might not be able to create what I just described, because, let's face it, that's going to take generations upon generations. Maybe it'll never happen. But we can touch.
Well, also that involves then some sort of solo race type thing. It doesn't allow for all the diversity, and it doesn't honor all the people that have either been forced to leave their homes or have chosen to move somewhere else. And so it's completely impossible without erasing races, basically.
Exactly. It's not, it's like, so there's that's the big piece. And then how do we, then bring that down into the reality that we're in right now? How do we do that? So there's something about holding that as a kind of, I feel this longing. I want everyone to have a sense of belonging. I want everyone to feel that they belong, that they're welcome, that all of diversity is here in an equal shape, whatever that is. And there's different pieces to this. One of the threads that I work with is leadership. Because I'm kind of with this piece of, well, what's the most effective way that I can use who I am as a person and everything, how I've arrived in this world. I left home with 100 quid in my pocket, but nevertheless, I have a lot of privilege simply by where I was born and how I was born and the families that I was born into. And how can I best use that in order to effect change, rather than sort of climbing into a corner and going, oh, fucking hell, I'm part of the problem. Of course I am part of the problem, but how can I change that around so that actually me being a part of the problem is a way that I can now be serving to change something, because I have privileges that others don't, which mean I can do that. So that's kind of the passion that I've got. And when I was 16, I was at something called the Battle of the Beanfields. I don't know how old you are, you may not remember that, but it was back in the Thatcher era. And I was a traveller, and it was all kicking off, and, the police were like beating us all up and trying to drag us off. And I remember thinking then, just want to go back to the land. I just want to go back to the land. The land is where it's at. It's like, how many of us, like you said, how many of us have the luxury to choose where choose the piece of land that we live on, because our body and our soul and our lineage and our culture, or all of that calls us, and then we don't have to worry about how we're going to make a living, or whether that's convenient for the rest of the family, or whether it's a war-torn country, or whether I'm going to be welcome because I'm the only person of colour there, or etc, etc, etc. It's so painful. It's just so bloody painful.
Whether I can afford that bit of land.
Whether I can afford it, all of it.
Yeah.
It's huge. We're at this monumental threshold where it's almost like everything is just being burned down to the ground. We're just being shown like this massive light bulb on all the fucking distortion, on all the ways in which whatever we've built, this great, wonderful empire of human species, is just, we're seeing now how disconnected we've been. And the result of it.
What do you see in the result of it? We were talking a little bit about things that are maybe more prevalent, and I wonder in your work, what is it that you see that disconnect? How is it playing out?
It's really what I said at the beginning, this feeling of feeling welcomed, that I am welcome and there's a place for me. I am welcome that there's a place for me. Whatever my culture, whatever my financial background, whatever I've come from, whatever I'm experiencing, all of it. There's this thread that I hear people sharing about in circle again and again and again, is I don't feel welcome, and I don't know where my place is, and I'm not able to live the life that I want to live and bring the gifts that I want to give, because I'm too busy struggling to survive, or dealing with living in a city that doesn't welcome me, and in a culture, all of that. Like, I'm just struggling to get by with food, shelter, water, or deal with
mental health,
physical sickness, oppression, discrimination. Like, the list is endless. And it seems that when we boil it down, and, we're sitting in circle and there's space to slow down enough, and really that someone feels safe enough to do that, and to open up that really, really, really tender place, like what I call the underbelly. And so often we find this place of, I just feel like I don't belong, that I'm not welcome, and that I can't be who I actually am. It's like I don't think our deepest pain is about not being loved. I think our deepest pain is not being able to live the life we know we're meant to live and give of our magnificence. That, I think, is our deepest pain. And you've got that on an individual level, and then you've got it as a systemic level, where all the prejudices come in and all the systems of hierarchy and dominance. So it's, you've got personal and collective to navigate in that. And it's like being up against a wall. You can't. It's like being in a small room with 4 brick walls, and it's like, which way do I turn? There's no way I can turn that makes this feel a bit easier.